Good morning, afternoon, evening to those who have joined. Depends on from where you are attending. We have a couple of people from Hiroshima that I know of. There must be others around the world who are attending. My name is Valere Mantels. I am heading the Vienna office of the Office for Disarmament Affairs, and I have the pleasure to welcome you all to today's seminar entitled The Stories from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Please don't mind the background announcement because security has decided on this day to conduct an exercise in the Vienna office, in the Vienna center. Talk about bad timing, but that's okay. Now, we felt it would be fitting to organize this seminar in the light of the numerous events commemorated and celebrated in August and September, which are linked to achieving international peace in general, nuclear disarmament, and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. In addition, 2021 marks an important milestone with the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons on 22 January, which has its first meeting of states parties scheduled for March 2022. That seems to be the last date we got. It remains a bit of a moving target, this meeting of states parties, but I'm sure that one of our afternoon speakers will address it. The aim of today's seminar is to raise awareness about the threat posed by nuclear weapons and nuclear testing, as well as the necessity of their total elimination. Looking at the organization of the seminar, we have two parts, two separate sessions, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. The one in the morning does some backward looking at what happened in August 1945. And we have a much more optimistic one looking ahead, although optimistic is within brackets, I would say. The morning session will have reflections from Keiko Ogura, but she is in Hibakusha from Hiroshima. We have a bit of a problem getting her online, but I'm sure that we can work that out. We have Ms. Nakao, Associate Professor at Hiroshima University, and we have Ms. Kagawa, who is studying in Vienna. We also have an afternoon session at 1:30 Central European Time, in which we will hear views from the diplomatic world, from civil society, and the academic world with Ambassador Kmentt, Director of Arms Control and Non-Proliferation at the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Fihn, who is Executive Director of ICAN, and Dr. Senn, who is Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Innsbruck. After every session, when all the speakers in the session have made their statement, we will allot time for questions and answers. The rules of the road, I'm sure that there is a slide somewhere that Erika can post. First of all, please mute your mic, except of course when you are speaking. If you do not have enough bandwidth, feel free to cut your video. We don't need to see you. We'd love to see you, but we don't need to see you if it's not possible. And to pose your questions, don't ask for the floor, but use the chat section of Teams. Before giving the floor to our first speaker, please allow me to read a message that I've been given from New York headquarters, the management of UNODA. I'll read the message now. I warmly welcome you to the webinar, Stories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, hosted by the Vienna Office for Disarmament Affairs. On the 6th and the 9th of August 1945, nuclear weapons were dropped on Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tens of thousands were killed in the blast, and in the aftermath, thousands more died from leukemia and other side effects caused by nuclear radiation that was released. Those who survived faced poverty, starvation, the loss of loved ones, and utter devastation of their lives, often leaving them with long-term psychological and emotional damage. These survivors, the Hibakusha, have been rightfully hailed as champions of peace and nuclear disarmament. And the current Secretary General, Guterres, has called them a beacon of hope for humanity. And thanks to the tireless efforts of the international community, civil society, and remarkable individuals such as the Hibakusha, nuclear weapons have not been used in armed conflict since 1945. But our luck cannot hold forever. And the only way to ensure that these existential weapons are never used again is through their complete, verifiable, and irreversible elimination. Significant progress has been made in nuclear disarmament with many landmark instruments, such as the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, nuclear weapon-free zones, deeply embedded norms against the use and testing of nuclear weapons, and massive reductions in deployed arsenals. And most recently, in 2017, a majority of UN member states adopted the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which entered into force earlier this year. The TPNW is a clear signal of support for multilateral nuclear disarmament and the regime underpinned by the NPT. However, there is much work to be done. Recent trends have seen a halting of and reversal in the gains made to date. Tensions between nuclear-armed states continue to rise as they develop and deploy new and better weapons, and as nuclear weapons increasingly intersect with new technologies and domains such as cyber, outer space, and this is drastically increasing nuclear risks. In such an environment, we must heed the word of Hibakusha. We should all feel honored to be joined by Keiko Ogura, whose advocacy and dedication to share her story with the world should inspire us to work towards achieving a world free of nuclear weapons. The Hibakusha have placed the human face on the cold logic of deterrence. They remind us of the human consequences of nuclear weapons, of the fact that any use of a nuclear weapon would be a humanitarian catastrophe to which no state would be able to respond. Above all, they remind us of the urgent need to make progress in the pursuit of a world free of nuclear weapons, a safer and a more secure world for all. I hope today we will discuss how to take steps in that direction. I thank you. That was a statement from our management in New York. Now, as I said, we're still working to get Ms. Ogura online. For some technical reason, she is unable to join at this moment. But I'm happy to cede the floor to Ms. Maika Nakao, who is Associate Professor at Hiroshima University. She received her PhD in History of Science from the University of Tokyo in 2015. Her book, Nuclear Science Culture in Pre-War Japan, Emergence of Atomic Utopia, was published in 2015 by Keiko Ogura. She has produced the documentary film Memories of the Kyoto Cyclotron, which was awarded a prize at the 50th Science and Technology Film and Video Festival 2009. And she is currently working on the cultural history of radiation in Japan before and after the atomic bomb. It has just been announced that this very unfortunate exercise has been terminated now, so we are all in the clear again. So I'd like to give the floor now to Ms. Nakao. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you very much for organizing and joining this event. It's my great pleasure to have a chance to talk today. And let me share the screen. Hiroshima raises Nagasaki phrase is a phrase that has been used to describe the marked difference between the two cities that are subjected to nuclear attacks. Nagasaki, the second city, has gotten less attention in the context of nuclear history and has been regarded as a rather silent city. Is this really true? How and why was this image created? Actually, Nagasaki has its own unique history that is worth knowing. I am a historian and I was working at Nagasaki University in the past 3 years and learned a deep history of Nagasaki. So today, I'd like to talk about Nagasaki and the survivors of the atomic bomb. So first, let me introduce you to some general knowledge about the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. The bomb was dropped 3 days after the bombing of Hiroshima, 1 day after the Soviet Union declared war against Japan. The bombing of Hiroshima and the Soviet Union's declaration of war were two factors that led the Japanese government to surrender. This means that there was no strategic meaning for the bombing of Nagasaki. In addition, Nagasaki was not the intended target of the second bombing. The intended target was Kokura, the northern area of Kyushu. But Kokura was covered by clouds on August 9th, so the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki instead, killing around 70,000 residents. The bomb was dropped in the Urakami area, not the center of Nagasaki. It was the center of a Christian community, where the people had suffered severe oppressions for hundreds of years. This coincidence makes the atomic bombing of Nagasaki unique. Historically, Nagasaki was Japan's main port during the centuries of national isolation, when contact with foreign nations was strictly forbidden. Therefore, Nagasaki was the most westernized city in Japan until the 19th century and had strong cultural influences from the Netherlands and China. At the same time, Nagasaki was also the center of Christianity in Japan. Christianity was brought to Japan in mid-16th century and spread quickly. The feudal government prohibited Christianity in the beginning of the 17th century. In the following years, churches were torn down and Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples were erected in their stead. Many Christians kept their faith and were tortured. Over 4,000 people, including 71 Europeans, are known to have died for their faith by the time the Christian prohibition ended in the late 19th century. During the persecution period, the Christians of the Urakami community suffered the most harsh treatment from the government. Many members of the community were arrested in a single sweep that occurred 4 times. The last time, 3,400 members were detained and exiled. Of these, only 1,900 were eventually repatriated, and 1,500 were killed or went missing. After the Christian prohibition ended, groups of Christians came back to the Catholic Church. The biggest of the many churches were constructed by Urakami Christian community in 1914. It was beautifully decorated and was deemed the largest cathedral of the East. The Urakami Cathedral was destroyed on August 9, 1945 by the American nuclear attack. More than 8,000 among 12,000 Urakami Catholics died. It was hard for the survivors to understand their tragedy. It seemed almost impossible to answer the question, why did they have to suffer again and again? And this time they were killed by Christians. Nagai Takashi, a radiologist who worked at Nagasaki Medical University, played a significant role in helping the Urakami Christians to understand the situation. Nagai had become a Christian when he married to an Urakami Christian. Just before the bombing, he was diagnosed with leukemia caused by radiation exposure from X-ray machine. The atomic bomb injured Nagai and killed his wife. Among the catastrophic and unbelievable event, Nagai tried to find meaning in the bombing and convert it to a positive meaning. On November 23, 1945, Nagai gave a speech at a mass funeral among the ruins of the Urakami. Nagai spoke words of comfort, reassuring the Urakami Christians, and linked the atomic bomb tragedy with Christian martyrdom. Nagai stated that the bombing exemplified atonement for the sin of the world. Nagai claimed that the atomic bombing of Nagasaki was not punishment, but what had ended darkness and brought peace. He claimed the Church of Urakami was placed on the altar of sacrifices as an atonement for the sins of humankind. That was the World War. It was chosen as a pure lamb, slaughtered and burned. Nagai declared, Urakami's sacrifice saved billions of people from the calamity of war. And as Chad Steele has pointed out, Nagai's interpretation of the bombing as having ended the war and saved lives echoed the narrative of the United States regarding the dropping of the atomic bomb. It is said that everyone who attended the funeral wept and were persuaded. The interpretation of the bombing as an Urakami sacrifice gave meaning to the community's suffering in a way they could comprehend. The image of Nagasaki praying after atomic bombing comes from this Christian tragedy. These photos were taken in the 1950s. The Urakami Cathedral had a different fate from the atomic bomb dome. The land was owned by the Urakami Christians, and they wanted to rebuild the new cathedral in the same place. The mayor believed that the ruins of the Urakami Cathedral should be preserved, but after visiting the US in the mid-1950s, he changed his stance from preservation to reconstruction. The city council of Nagasaki decided to remove the ruins and rebuild the Urakami Cathedral in 1958. In 1955, Nagasaki City signed a sister city agreement with St. Paul, Minnesota. This was the first sister city agreement with a foreign country in Japan. The mayor prioritized the relationship with the US over preserving the remains of the atomic bomb. It's not the surprising thing. After the catastrophic event, the reconstruction from the ruins was the biggest concern of the bombed cities. As the local governments moved toward reconstruction, the survivors were left behind. Most of them had lost their family members or loved ones and had felt guilty that they could not save them. They lived with misery. In addition, many survivors were afflicted by the after effects of the atomic bomb. Because the after effects were not well understood, they were often regarded as lazy. From 1945 to 1952, Japan was under the general headquarters, the supreme commander for the Allied occupation, and censorship persisted until 1949. The public didn't understand the full extent of the suffering following Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The emergence of atomic energy was described as a glorious scientific achievement, and the word atom became popular in the popular media. Under such circumstances, the survivors of the atomic bomb didn't receive medical and financial supports, and it is said as the decade of blank. It was in the mid-1950s that the Japanese people spoke out against nuclear weapons and the medical relief for the survivors of the bomb began. So let's see the movement. The visual image of atomic bomb victims began to appear in Japanese mass media after the occupation ended. August 1952 issue of Asahi Graph is known as the publication which showed the entire image of the atomic bomb casualty for the first time. Around the same time, several films focused on the miserable consequences of atomic bombing appeared. The visual images of atomic bomb victims were overflowed in the media, and these images are often used to make anti-war statements. Around that time, several symptoms became obvious among survivors, and these symptoms started to be reported in the media. Among them, leukemia was a disease that attracted the most attention. A variety of symptoms such as memory loss, sarcoma, and cancer were noted in the newspapers. However, at that time, no one knows the entire picture of the late effects of atomic bomb. It took several years and decades for the symptoms caused by the bomb to be understood, and some aspects are still not understood well. The survivors lived in fear of these symptoms. When the aftereffects of the atomic bombing were becoming apparent, the beginning incident, the biggest trigger for the Japanese public to speak out against nuclear weapons, occurred and created a nationwide fear of nuclear radiation. On March 1, 1954, the United States conducted the most powerful hydrogen bomb test ever at the Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. At the moment of the explosion, the Daigo Kuruma, a pelagic Japanese tuna fishing boat, was longline fishing near the test site. The ashes from the bomb covered the boat. 23 fishermen and tuna were later found to be strongly radioactive, and the ashes were dubbed as the ashes of death. The exposure was covered by the newspaper, and fear of radiation spread in Japan. Consumers were reluctant to buy tuna, hitting the fishing industry hard. The petition movement calling for the prohibition of ANH bomb testing started in many places in Japan spontaneously, and the number of petitions reached around 1/3 of the Japanese nation until August 1955, when the First World Conference against atomic and hydrogen bombs held in Hiroshima as an outcome of this movement. Along with this movement, the casualties of atomic bombing came to public attention, and medical and financial support for the survivors were proceeded. Eventually, in March 1957, the Act for Atomic Bomb Sufferers Medical Care was enacted. The term Hibakusha was used to refer to those to whom this law applies. As the mechanism of the late effects was not fully understood, the people who were eligible for the act was defined by the area where they were located at the time of the bombing and the days following. Though the area had been expanded in response to the repeated requests from the people outside of the area, the class action suit to seek recognition as Hibakusha is still going on. Another outcome of the movement was the overestimation of excessive fear of radiation effects. In the process of clarifying the unfortunate reality, a tendency has emerged to assume that all Hibakusha suffer from incurable diseases, or that all children of Hibakusha are malformed. The Hibakusha bodies had been used to persuade people of the dangerousness of nuclear weapons and radiation. This has led to strong social discrimination against Hibakusha. The marriage discrimination became the big problem, and Ibuse Masuji's Black Rain, the most well-known atomic bomb literature to date, depicts that problem. The social discrimination hurt Hibakusha so hard, and many committed suicide. Not only social discrimination, but also other factors such as physical disorder and economical difficulty also contributed to the suicide, and all these factors cannot be separated. Hibakusha have suffered from the feeling of guilty, discrimination due to lack of understanding, and various mental and physical symptoms. However, they have not been just for passive beings. They have been active and have raised their voices to demand social understanding, compensation, and nuclear abolition. In 1967, the Ministry of Health Welfare issued a white paper on the atomic bombing, which stated that there were no significant disparities between Hibakusha and non-Hibakusha. A group of citizens opposed to the white paper established the Nagasaki Testimony Group to record its experiences of atomic bombing. There has been so many investigations, scientific investigations on the survivor. However, many survivors feel that scientific investigations are not understand their suffering sufficiently. In 1977, Citizens NGO Group held an international symposium on A-bomb issue to illuminate the full picture of the damage caused by the bomb. The survivors have been expressing their experience and thought through literature, art, journalism, and activism, and the word and expressions they have been creating are very precious. And it was 73 years after the bombing when I started to work at Nagasaki University. At that time, I was thinking that the atomic bombing was the past event. However, I have learned that the suffering of the atomic bombing is still continue to present, and it is not easy to understand such suffering and pain. Individuals have different experiences. I got the feeling that I didn't know anything and I don't know anything. It is not the number or the geographical area. It is the suffering of countless individuals, suffering of dead and injured, and suffering of the people who are left behind. And I'd like to know the stories of each individual. And in Nagasaki, various prayers are offered every year and every month and every day, everywhere. And they are not only those associated with Christians, they are praying for the dead, for peace, and for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Thank you for your attention.
When you say, please tell me when, okay?
All right, thank you, Ms. Nakao. I have Ms. Keiko Ogura on the phone now, and we will use the phone to relay what she has to say. Now, I must ask Alexandra, my colleague, to get her PowerPoint on the screen. So we are ready to listen to you, Ms. Ogura. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Sorry, you cannot see my face, but you can see at least PowerPoint. So, and this is the message from Hiroshima, 1945, August the 6th. I'm going to tell you what happened on that day and the aftermath of the atomic bombing. I'm one of Hiroshima survivors, and I was 80 years old, though I was a little girl, but I clearly remember everything, and so I can tell you. So, number two, this is the mushroom cloud. I was under the mushroom cloud, so because of that, we did not know the people above mushroom cloud. But now I'm going to tell you under the mushroom cloud. Okay, let's go to slide 3. This is the and picture from right to left. I mean from the west part to east part. You see the on your right the hill, that is the hill, and then on your front you will see the white area, that's Hiroshima Bay, and then until the seashore, everything was destroyed. Now we are going to the west area, east area. You see some buildings completely destroyed. Behind these buildings, there is a big. Those buildings were, and now you see those buildings were, and banks, insurance companies, and so on. And then, so you can see everything in front of you was completely destroyed. Those buildings, banks and insurance companies, and so behind those buildings, and then there was the city center. And turn to slide 3. Next one, slide 4. Can you see the picture of Hiroshima? And you see the red part that shows the completely burned down area. And you see yellow area that was 100% destroyed. But the rest of the white area, that certain part, 80% and 50%, but destroyed. And then I was to the north, and you see the hill. I don't know, and so you see the hill behind. Can you see the Hiroshima Station? Hiroshima Station, and in front of the station, there is a green part that is Hiroshima, the Futabayama Hill. The other side of the hill, between 2,000 meter area, and then 2,000 to 500 meter area. I was exposed to there. And so you see 7 rivers, people being chased, and they jumped into the river, and also some people and fled according to the river up to the north and so on. Let's go to number 5. Number 5, and Hiroshima City down area. You can see Hiroshima City is a small area, but so toward the north area, such a huge area, and so-called black rain, contaminated radiation, charcoal rain fell. So you can see that is, such a huge area, everything was destroyed. Let's go number 6, slide number 6. And then number 6, this is the picture, and picture, and down to you can see the hill center part, and then down of the hill there is Hiroshima Station. So I was between the hill, and you see circle, and there are three circles, and then number one, my house is near Shinto Shrine gate. We say Tori gate. Can you see that? And then I was living near Shinto Shrine, and the other circle, it is the park, Ushita Park, where my father cremated the victims there, over 700 victims. Many people rushed to this area, my area, and then the third circle, that is my elementary school. So that means before atomic bomb was dropped, so I was going to my elementary school every day. So this is not so far, 20 minutes or so on foot. And then you see the river, and there it is said, the Kanda Bridge. So fire reached over this river, and then near riverside, almost near school, fire reached. So I was so scared because the fire was coming, but the fire stopped, and near my elementary school. What happened on that day, next to number 7 slide, this is a picture painted by Motomachi High School students. And then on that day, father said, Keiko, you shouldn't go to school today. And she said, why? All my classmates went to school, but the previous night, the 6th of August, 5th of August, around midnight, all of a sudden there was silence, and then air raid warning. So we were so scared, and they rushed to the shelter. Waited, nothing happened, just quiet. Then we tried to sleep, we returned home, tried to sleep, and then 30 minutes later or so, another air raid warning. So we rushed to the school again, to the shelter, but nothing happened. So something like that until the evening, until next morning. So unusual silence, air raid warning we heard. Because of that, the father said, Keiko, today something might happen. So you should stay near your house. So I was on the road, all of a sudden, 6th of August, and a very strong flash. I felt everything turned to white. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stand. I was wrong on the ground. Okay, go to number 8 slide. And then I was unknown for a while. When I opened my eyes, everything seemed, destroyed, but very dark. I couldn't see. In the darkness, I was wondering what happened. So my near my house, everything was broken. But in front of me, far away, I thought something was burning. That cottage or barn, farmer's barn, and that was made of straw. Roof was made of straw. So there are the steps. Because of the flash, Hiroshima people say that's a pika. Pika, and then secondary blast and sound dong. You see? So we say, we don't say atomic bomb, we say pika dong. So because of pika, the first flash, flammable things start to burn, like such a straw roof or some leaves on the hill caught fire. In the center of the city, of course, and people and, Center Park instantly died because of rain by flash. And then near the hypocenter, and people clothes caught fire and started to burn. So there are so many people were running and leaving from the city with burning clothes, or most of them were naked. And then those people reached to my home later. And then next to number 9, I returned my home. What happened to my home? How I could reach my home? In the darkness, I heard somebody was crying, that my little brother cried. So because of that, I tried to go home and according to cry. Then, and all the glass doors and windows were broken. Hundreds and thousands of pieces splashed up on the wall. And the ceiling was wrong. But my father was between the widely open glass doors. So he was safe and protected the big pine tree in the garden. Because she was not hurt, and then from next day, she started to cremate the people. And then my little brother, bleeding from head and crying, appeared. But my family, rest of my family, mother and the sisters, they were not hurt so badly. Then I step out next to slide 10. In front of my house, I saw all of my neighbor houses were broken, but I felt something that was so-called black rain, charcoal raindrop, and my clothes became dirty. So let's go slide 11. You can see, and then down, you can see in front of the hill, that's the Hiroshima station, and then there is the hill. The other side of the hill there was my house. Can you see the big hill, and then on your left, the small hill. My house was between. So my brother was the foot of the hill and behind the Hiroshima station, and then he was watching the airplane B-29 appeared. All students were working the potato field. He saw that, and he saw even a small thing was released from the airplane. That was atomic bomb. But he was lucky. A second before explosion, he turned back to try to chase airplane. Airplane dropped the bomb and disappeared. Changed the course and disappeared. And then, because of the blast, all the students, around 1,000 students were working in front of the foot of the hill between Hiroshima station, behind the Hiroshima station. They were beaten on the ground, on the field, and then became unconscious. Then my brother came to himself and climbed this hill and saw how the city is burning. And then wounded people were rushing to the station and the foot of the hill, and they used the river in the center. So many people crossed the bridge and go to my area between 2 hills. You see, center part, so there was my house. My brother seeing that city and coming down and to my house. And he said, so many people, wounded people are coming to this area because I live near Hiroshima Station, Shinto Shrine, those days. We were told if something happens, go to the Shinto Shrine or temple. There will be first aid station and the doctor. We were told, the people believed, and that they rushed to my area where you saw the circle with the shrine gate, the totem gate, that area. And then I stepped out to my house and so went to the street where I was exposed to. You saw, and I was in the first painting. I was a little girl, and moment. Do you remember that picture? The street was so small, but not so wide, but many wounded people were coming, and they wanted to go to the shrine. They believe there must be a first aid station. And then I went to the Shinto Shrine, slide 12. You see, such kind of pictures. This was also painted by high school boys. And you see, and on the stone steps leading to the shrine, many wounded people there. And then there was no first aid station. And then I saw only one soldier having one tin bucket with the oil, and then applying some kind of oil or tin oil something to those wounded people. So they were staying, and more people were coming. My house was on the way to shrine, just to you see the name, the Yamaguchi, parents' name. So around that area, that is just behind or just under that, there was my house. That means many people were coming to the shrine. And then that time, and everybody was saying, no word except the water. Everybody was saying water, that's all. Then I ran back and I got the water and then delivered and they gave them. Most of the people were thanks to me, but among them, 2 persons drinking the water from me. Soon after that, he died in front of me. I was shocked. And then that day in the evening, my father said, "Children, you didn't give water to anybody." So my brother said, "Oh, that's everybody knows that. I didn't do such a foolish thing," he said. So I said, No, I didn't give water. I couldn't say the truth. And then since then, that became my trauma because I kept silent for a long time. I couldn't say that. Okay. And then let's go to slide 13. This is the scene, and next day I saw Hiroshima City until the seashore, and you see the hill, things like here. That's Hiroshima Island where there was a quarantine station, and I saw the city completely disappeared, and including islands I saw. I was surprised. Such place, this is such place, many people return. So such a place, the many over 2,000 so-called Avon orphans return home. They were away, but they were not told. And what happened in Hiroshima City. From 9 to 12 years old, elementary school kids evacuated. And then later, and that was August 15, they were told by temple people where they stayed. And then now your parents, your sisters and brothers are sitting in the heaven by Buddha. All the children cried and cried. Out of 30, 27 children lost some of their family members or who had badly wounded, very wounded family members. They had a hard time. But, next slide. This is the 12 years after the bomb. Hiroshima City was like that. So people tried to reconstruct again. And then now you see T-shaped bridge, and over there there is the museum on your left, Avon Dome, so called like that. In front of the dome, there were some barracks, and then they are selling something and something like that. But this is the start of another nuclear arms race. We heard that the Japanese tuna boat was contaminated by hydrogen test, nuclear test. And then that was the first time, and 10 years after the bombing, and the survivor in front of the people said, look at me, I am one of Hiroshima survivors. So we thought, and the world understood and how bad, how evil nuclear weapon is. And we believe. So we are unlucky people just to keep silent. Soon, and the people learn, and then they will stop to create the nuclear weapon. But 10 years later, we learned still the world, the big countries, powerful countries are, creating nuclear weapons. So since then, there are many, groups were established. And then, in this 1957, there were big international conference was held from all over the world, and the visitor and the delegates came, and then we made we say Genshiken or Genshicho, anti-H&A bomb organization, And then, so now, what is now slide 15? Peace Park area is like this. We want to convey our pledge, what we want to say is, you can read. This is the sentence and carved on the surface of the stone chest under the cenotaph, memorial cenotaph. For we shall not repeat the evil. Evil means also nuclear weapon, but for us, something, including pandemic right now, and against people's life, everything seems for us evil. But the worst is nuclear weapon. So instead of hating enemy, or instead of thinking revenge, and we started to work. We started to work the steps against the nuclear weapon. And now underneath you see this is 338 to 939. Those are the names. Every year, new names that may join 1 year, and so-called survivors or Hibakusha who died, and the numbers are written added. This is the number. This is 6th of August this year. And so I'm sorry, I can only tell you what happened. If you have some questions, I would love to answer. But I myself started to speak out and that I am a survivor. And that was actually 50 years from the bombing day. We were afraid, even though I was 8 years old, and then we children said, shut our mouth. If we tell others that we were in the city on that time, it will not be married. We said so. Actually, my elementary school classmates gathered 70 years after the bombing. For the first time, we talked about on that day. Such a long time, most of the people kept silent, including me. And then we were afraid of discrimination. But of course, the people who had some scars or keloid or burns, of course, they had a hard time. And then, so we kept secret. But 10 years after the bombing, we learned that such a silly thing, dropping the bomb and the raising nuclear weapons doesn't stop because of that. We started a new our activity. But we survivors are so happy because we have a kind of dream. This world without nuclear weapons. Somebody said that there's some number, so the number of nuclear weapons are getting smaller and smaller, less and less. No, for we, including me, survivors, but even one nuclear weapon means thousands of nuclear, almost the same. We are so allergic to nuclear issues and nuclear bombs. So really, we want to have a total ban. And so I'm so happy, and ICAN and got the Nobel Prize, and I'm so happy, and that we have such solidarity, and now and the people are gathering and having and talking. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much.
Very nice, Keiko. Thank you so much for joining us. We can find a multitude of interviews and articles from you and about you on the internet, but it never beats it never beats listening to you in person. We do apologize for the technical problems. We found a workaround, and I hope you can join us later for the questions and answers period. Thank you again. And at this
tell me when started with time.
At this moment, I would like to introduce Miss Kagawa, who was born in Hiroshima. Her family was also affected by the consequences of the atomic bomb. But currently she lives in Vienna, and she is specializing in atomic bomb literature at the University of Vienna. So Yoshie, please, you have the floor.
Thank you for introducing me. I will now try to share my PowerPoint. Just a moment, please. Oops. So, do you see well? Can you hear well? Yes, okay, thank you very much. So, good morning and good evening to all the participants from all over the world. I feel very honored and grateful to have the opportunity to speak on this webinar in a year in which an essential step has been taken towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Today, I would like to talk about the story of Sadako Sasaki and her paper cranes. You may know the story from reading books by Karl Bruckner or Eleanor Kohr or many others, but I think the real story is quite unknown. Here you see the tiny paper cranes that Sadako had folded. These can be seen in the Peace Memorial Museum in Hiroshima and have given a lasting impression on the hearts of many people, becoming the driving force behind various activities to advocate for human rights. These little origami cranes are filled with many thoughts and convey the emotions tangibly. They are the starting point. First, I will talk about the action story. Could you unmute? Thank you.
Yeah.
And then, could you mute? Thank you very much. Then about how it became a narrative story in various publications and eventually a symbol of the anti-nuclear movement. After that, I will briefly talk about my background as my family lost our family member to the atomic bomb. Through this presentation, I would like to rethink with you about the legacy of Sadako and her paper cranes. On the day of the atomic bomb was dropped, Sadako was 2 years old. Sadako and her family were in their house in Kusunoki-cho. It was only 1.6 kilometers away from the hypocenter. At the moment the atomic bomb was dropped, all the family members were sitting in the living room having breakfast, except for the father, who had gone to work on orders from the military. According to Sadako's brother, at the moment of the explosion, the house was destroyed by the blast and blown away. But his mother, grandmother, and himself were soon found safe. And when he looked for Sadako, she was crying and sitting outside on a box. When the collapsed houses started to burn and the fire came closer, they fled towards the nearby Ota River. Her grandmother went back to the house to get some stuff, and that was the last moment they saw her. A neighbor later told them about the grandmother who had died in a fireproof water tank to avoid the flames. They were taken on board a boat belonging to a friend of their family and dodged the flames that were burning on both river banks. At that time, the black rain started to fall, and Sadako was hit by the salty rain. Sadako had been unharmed at the time of the bombing and always healthy afterwards, so no one could have imagined that she would suffer from the A-bomb disease a decade later. Then, 10 years after the atomic bombing, the number of people suffering from leukemia and cataract had risen sharply. In January 1955, Sadako was feeling tired and unwell, and the swelling in her throat was getting bigger. Her parents were concerned and had her examined at the local hospital and at the atomic bomb casualty commissions. The result was that lymph glands were enlarged. At her next checkup on 16th of February, she was diagnosed by lymphocytic leukemia. The next day, Shigeo, her father, asked the doctor to clearly explain her condition. The doctor's answer was that Sadako had about 3 months to live, a year at the longest. Shigeo could not believe it because Sadako looked so healthy. Sadako's parents then determined to do everything for her with the sole aim of making Sadako feel happy. So they decided to at least make a kimono for Sadako. For lack of time, Sadako's mother had worked all night to sew her a festive kimono, and she went to school in it to say goodbye to her classmates. Then the painful treatment began. Doctors gave her blood transfusions and prednisone, but in those days it was all done by injections, not by drip infusion. So that treatment was very painful and distressing. Furthermore, they also had to pay for each injection. The medical treatment law for A-bomb survivors did not come into force until 1957, and before that there was no financial support. Sadako was well aware of her parents' financial difficulties, so she endured the pain and never complained. Sadako was not told the name of the disease, but she was sensible and knew exactly what the nurse was talking about and how her condition was. Whenever they measured her white blood cell count, she wrote down the figures and checked them exactly. On the 6th of August of 1955, the first World Conference Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs was held. In the wake of the Daigofuku-ryumaru incident the previous year, there had been growing domestic and international protests against nuclear testing. At that time, a high school in Nagoya sent several thousands of paper cranes to the Red Cross Hospital, where Sadako was staying. This was the first encounter of Sadako and the paper cranes. Sadako had a legend that if she folded 1,000 paper cranes, her wish would be granted. So she and her roommate went around the hospital to collect wrapping papers and medicine cellophanes, cut them into squares, and competed with each other to fold the cranes. They both completed their 1,000 cranes within 1 month. Her roommate was able to leave the hospital at the end of August. Sadako had to stay, but she did not give up and continued to fold the cranes. The cranes Sadako folded became smaller and more finely detailed. In October, she was weakened by all accounts, but she still kept on smiling to her family. And then, finally, her life came to an end. Sadako folded the first 1,000 paper cranes in the hope that she would be healthy again. But the second 1,000 cranes she folded with the wish that her parents' financial problem would be solved. 2 weeks after Sadako's death, 30 of her classmates visited her house. After Sadako had been hospitalized, they had promised to visit her regularly, but Sadako had died before they could keep their word, and they were suffering from regret. A young man named Ichiro Kawamoto, whom Sadako's teacher had introduced to them, had also come to see if he could help them. Having read about Sadako's death in the newspaper, he suggested that he and Sadako's classmates could work together to construct a statue in memory of all the children who became victims of the radiation effects. Initially a small group, the fundraising campaign soon spread to primary schools across Japan. My father, Ikuo, recalls that he also donated his pocket money to Sadako's monument when he was about 14 years old. The Children's Peace Monument was finally completed and unveiled on 5th of May 1958, the Japanese public holiday as known as Children's Day. The bronze statue holding a paper crane looked very much like Sadako. At this time, Sadako's life was widely told through fundraising activities, newspapers announcing the completion of the statue, and the making of a movie, which gradually added some fictive elements and became a narrative story in Japan. That was the beginning of the Sadako legend. On the back of the picture, we can see the display case, which is full of paper cranes. The very first paper crane sent to Hiroshima came from Austria in 1961, which were 7,000 paper cranes folded by children in Austria. Now I would like to tell you the story of how it all began. In May 1957, a journalist named Robert Jung visited Hiroshima to research for his reportage. He was a Jewish man born in Germany who had lived in the United States during and after the Second World War and was about to move back to Europe. Jung and his wife Ruth, who was also a Jew but from Vienna, had both lost almost all family members and relatives to the Holocaust. At the time, Jung had just published his second book, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns. He wrote this reportage after an intensive interview to a nuclear scientist, the so-called father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer. Having investigated the people who had created the atomic bombs, he now felt the need to research the people who were exposed to the atomic bomb and report to the world about the devastation and the current situation. Kawamoto heard that a famous foreign journalist came to Hiroshima and visited Jung in his hotel with Sadako's photo. He wanted Jung to know that the children in Hiroshima were now dying from the aftermath of the radiation. When he saw Sadako's photo, Jung asked him if he could embrace it, and he did for a while, as if swearing something to her. Since we have just heard the experiences of Mrs. Keiko Ogura, I would like to mention with big respect and appreciation that the person who supported Jung's research in Hiroshima with interpretation and coordination was her husband, Mr. Kaoru Ogura. Jung interviewed many people in Hiroshima within 1 week of his stay. Quite intensively, sometimes it was almost too forceful. His enthusiastic work was because he felt the pain of the Hibakusha, like his own pain, as one of the Holocaust survivors. In 1959, Jung completed his work, Children of the Ashes, and published it in Austria. This is a very first book that brought Sadako's story to the world. Then Sadako's story takes the next step and transformed into a novel. The Austrian writer Karl Bruckner was born into a proletarian family in Vienna's 16th district. At the age of 28, he emigrated to Brazil and stayed there for several years. During the Second World War, Bruckner was a soldier in the German Wehrmacht and was mainly deployed as a reporting motorbike rider. It is said that Bruckner was very proud of not having killed anyone that he did during his military service. As a motorbike reporter, he visited many field hospitals where he saw lots of injured soldiers and visited many countries all across Europe. According to his friend and business partner Richard Bamberger, Bruckner first became aware of the Sadako story through a small newspaper article reporting on the Children's Peace Monument. Deeply touched and inspired by the article, he studied 6 books about Hiroshima and Nagasaki that were available at that time. Among these 6 books, only the one of Robert Jung presented Sadako's story. A remarkable innovation of Bruckner's story was that he included the story of the atomic bomb on a novel for use, which was groundbreaking at the time of the escalation of the Cold War and was considered problematic after its publication. It also strongly reflects his idea of pacifism, with his firm conviction that those who know nothing of war tragedies end up being victims of it. Sadako will Leben, The Day of the Bomb, won the Austrian Children's Book Award and was designated as a secondary reading for peace education in the schools. The novel was translated into 22 languages, and within 4 years, some 2 million copies had been sold in 25 countries and regions around the world. And now, as a last point, I would like to talk briefly about the history of my family. On the day of the atomic bombing, my father was 3 years old and playing in front of his house in Hatsukaichi, which was 16 kilometers from the hypocenter. My father's brother, my uncle Yoshie, was 13 years old. Although it was a time of summer vacation, all the students were mobilized and went to the city to work on the demolition of buildings. My uncle was in the group that worked in Kwamicho, which is only about 900 meters from the hypocenter. Because it was too close, 369 students and teachers were killed directly by the bomb. My grandmother was searching for him for many days, but she could not find any personal belongings of him. She was exposed to the residual radioactivity and lost her hair and went temporarily blind. My father doesn't remember well, but he has a memory that his mother feared the sunlight and spent several months in a dark room. The middle photo shows the school uniforms put together from 3 different students, as one complete set from one person was not available. My uncle should also have had such a uniform. The only thing left we have from Yoshie is this photo when he was about 3 years old. Here you can clearly see that my uncle was almost next to the hypocenter and probably died immediately. Sadako fled the house in Kusunoki-cho and was on the boat in the Ota River when the black rain fell. My father Ikuo was so far away that the map does not show the place. My mother was also in a remote place. She was living on an island and she can remember seeing the atomic mushroom cloud. Now parents are healthy and are living in Hiroshima. My father was 3 years old. Sadako was 2, so they belong to the same generation. This anthology of poems shows the agony of the people caused by the atomic bombing and the war. The poet and activist Sankichi Toge wanted to collect the poems written by ordinary people, especially children who were suffering in their daily lives and had a strong desire for peace. My father was 10 years old at that time. Hearing that poems were being collected, he wrote one and submitted it. I think there is no need to add any comments to his poem. Robert Jung writes in his epilogue, "When I first visited Hiroshima, I went there simply as a reporter who wished to write the interesting history of a foreign city. But the more deeply preoccupied I became with this story, the more apparent it was to me that I could not remain outside and above it, but be part of it. As a survivor of Holocaust, Jung felt being part of the Hibakusha in Hiroshima. Since then, he engaged not only as a writer, but also as a leading activist in the anti-nuclear movement. Having studied the Sadako story, I couldn't help but be reminded of the power of literature. The more we deepen our learning, the more we can strengthen our imagination and build emotional bonds between individuals, even if they have long since passed away. Emotions are the driving force that activates people. At the bottom of Sadako's story, in the injustice of innocent children becoming victims of adults' irresponsibility, much like the environmental preservation issues we face today. We need to shape our future sustainably and make sure we do everything with a sense of responsibility. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
What I would like to suggest is we take note of the questions and we will give them to Keiko, Maika, and Yoshie, and we'll put them on our webpage somehow. Erika is very inventive in doing so. So and then we can stop this first session here. The only thing what I would like to say is, apart from thanking Keiko, Maika, and Yoshie, of course, is that for those who have the opportunity to visit Hiroshima and or Nagasaki, please do. It's a sobering experience. And if you ever manage to go to Nagasaki, please do not forget to visit the Hill of Grace. Meet the people, the survivors firsthand, and I think you will come back as a changed person. At least I did when I visited the places, and I've been there a couple of times, and every time it's an eye-opener. And please try to figure out how to fold those cranes. I've tried a couple of times. I'm very clumsy in these things, so I didn't manage. I even got somebody from Hiroshima trying to teach me how to do it. It's not easy. My crane looked like a penguin, so that was not the idea. But eventually you'll get there. Anyway, I'd like to thank everybody who joined us for being here. If you have more questions, please do not hesitate to send them to us. This afternoon, we start again at 1:30 Vienna time. And we'll have Alexander Kmentt, Ambassador Kmentt, Beatrice Fihn, and Dr. Martin Senn joining us for a discussion. Thank you very much.